Hi, welcome to video 1.2 Examples of Natural Selection. In this video I'll be addressing four ideas: how the environment plays a role in natural selection, the concept of phenotype, the concept of fitness, and I'll give you an example of how humans are susceptible to the concept of natural selection. Let's start off by discussing the environment. Oftentimes in the environment you'll see normal curves or normal distribution that look like this. What this means is that the intermediate phenotype is found most often, whereas the extreme phenotypes are found less often in nature. Now what natural selection can do is natural selection can actually change this, and you can end up with one of the extreme phenotypes being found more often and the intermediate phenotype and the other phenotype being found much less often. In this case, instead of the average phenotype being found most often, we would say this curve has shifted to the left and this extreme is now found most often. That is referred to as directional selection. In stabilizing selection, what happens is almost the opposite. In stabilizing selection, the intermediate phenotype is selected most often, and environmental pressures cause less and less of the two extreme phenotypes to be selected by natural selection. In disruptive phenotype, we see both extreme phenotypes being selected for, and we see evolutionary pressures selecting against the average phenotype. And in further videos we'll have examples of these and we'll discuss these in class as well. Now the concept of phenotype is important because in evolution the only thing that really matters is your phenotype. Now in this little diagram I've shown you that your phenotype ultimately is determined by your DNA. Your DNA is organized into a set of genes. Your genes determine your genotype, and ultimately your genotype determines your phenotype. But in terms of evolution, the phenotype is really the only thing that matters. We could say that evolution acts on your phenotype. Natural selection, or Mother Nature, can't see what your DNA looks like. Now, it's an interesting concept or a confusing concept because yes, your phenotype is determined by your DNA, but just keep in mind that Mother Nature cannot see your DNA. Therefore, the evolutionary forces cannot act on DNA. The concept of fitness is very important to understand. Fitness is simply defined as not only the ability to survive, but the ability to survive and reproduce. Now, fitness may or may not have anything to do with physical fitness. This is referring to evolutionary fitness, surviving and reproducing. One example of fitness that was mentioned in Mr. Anderson's video is the concept of sickle cell anemia. A normal red blood cell would look like this. If you suffer from sickle cell, your red blood cells would be shaped like a sickle. And this is due to just one mutation on one nucleotide. Remember, a nucleotide is one of the letters found in your DNA, an A, a T, a C, or a G. Now, the dominant allele would be the capital A, and the capital A allele means that your red blood cells are going to be okay. The sickle cell is actually a recessive allele. So in order to have sickle cell, you would have to have two copies of the recessive allele, or you'd have to be heterozygous recessive to end up with sickle cell. Now if you have two copies of the dominant allele, you're going to be okay. You're not going to suffer from sickle cell. And what's actually interesting is if you have one capital allele, you're not going to get sickle cell. But then that lowercase a, which would normally we refer to as the sickle cell gene, this is actually going to give you something that we call malaria resistance. Now malaria resistance is not real important in the United States, but malaria is a deadly disease that is passed by mosquitoes, and in tropical regions around the world malaria is one of the most deadly diseases out there. The last thing I would like to talk about is humans and antibiotic resistance. Now humans can be infected by bacteria. When you are infected by bacteria, you're typically infected by hundreds if not thousands of that particular strain of bacteria or species of bacteria. And because you're infected by so many bacteria, the bacteria could have quite a bit of genetic diversity. Now in this case I've drawn some of the bacteria in blue and some of the bacteria in red, and I've labeled these two red bacteria as being resistant. Now when I say they're resistant, that means they're resistant to antibiotics, and antibiotics are drugs prescribed by your doctor to kill bacteria. The reason these bacteria would be resistant is not because they are bigger, faster, or stronger. It is simply due to a difference in their genetic code. Now, if you do take an antibiotic, the antibiotic would kill all of the blue bacteria, because that's what antibiotics do, but the two resistant bacteria would be able to survive and reproduce. What you end up with is a colony of bacteria in your body that is now completely resistant to the antibiotics, And that means that scientists and pharmacologists are going to have to create new antibiotics to fight off this resistant antibiotic. And so this puts us on what we call an antibiotic treadmill, where we as humans and scientists and pharmacologists are trying to keep up with the evolution of bacteria over time. So those are examples of natural selection, and let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you.